The night in Hollow Creek was darker than usual, the kind of inky blackness that swallows stars and presses against your window panes. Most folks here know better than to go out after sunset. It's not because of crime, but because of the shadow that looms just beyond the trees on the northern ridge. There, like a rotting monument to misery, stands Blackwood Asylum. For decades, it's been left to decay. Its gates are rusted shut, its windows are like shattered teeth, and its corridors echo with a silence that feels anything but empty. The locals say it's alive in there. They say those who enter don't always come back out. Ethan, Sarah, and Daniel grew up on these stories. To them, Blackwood was more a legend than a place. Something whispered around campfires to scare kids into behaving. Ethan always laughed it off. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. To him, the asylum was just an old, abandoned building filled with dust and rats. Tonight, he decided to prove it. His friends warned him it was a terrible idea, but when Sarah teased that he was too scared, his pride took over. And so, on a cold autumn night, the three of them pushed open the asylum's rusted gates and stepped onto grounds where even the wind seemed afraid to blow. The building rose above them like the carcass of some great stone beast. Its windows were black holes, its walls streaked with mold, and the roof sagged as if collapsing under the weight of its own sorrow. As they walked the cracked path to the front doors, the air grew colder, thick with a metallic tenth that stuck in their throats. Sarah pulled her coat tighter, whispering that they should turn back. But Ethan just smirked. "It's just a building," he said, his voice a little too loud. "What's the worst that can happen?" The doors groaned as they pushed them open, the sound echoing through the asylum like a final warning. Inside, the darkness felt heavy, like it had substance. Their flashlights cut narrow beams through the dust, revealing peeling paint, overturned gurneys, and abandoned wheelchairs. Faded words were scratched into the walls, pleas for help, desperate prayers, and warnings to stay away. Some looked disturbingly fresh, even though no one had been inside for years. The floor was sticky in places. When Daniel shone his light down, he swore he saw dried blood staining the tiles. Ethan waved it off as just rust and water damage, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. They moved deeper into the asylum, their footsteps the only sound in the long, door-lined corridors. Most doors were locked, but the ones standing ajar revealed rooms filled with broken restraints and overturned beds. A smell of rot clung to everything. In the old recreation hall, the remains of a piano slumped in a corner, its keys broken like jagged teeth. A photograph hung crookedly on the wall, showing doctors and nurses standing proudly in front of the asylum in its prime. Time had blurred their faces, but one nurse's eyes seemed unnervingly sharp, as if she were staring right at them. When Ethan tugged the frame off the wall, the glass shattered. Behind it, scratched crudely into the plaster, were 3 words. Asterisk, leave before midnight. Asterisk. Sarah's face went white. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but his hand trembled as he set the broken frame down. They decided to wait in the recreation room, lighting a small lantern. Its flickering glow made the shadows dance and crawl across the walls. At first, the silence was almost peaceful. But then, faint noises began to creep in, at the edge of their hearing. A whisper here, a sigh there, a faint scraping, like fingernails on wood. They tried to convince themselves it was just the wind, the old building settling, but the sounds grew clearer. Words began to form. Asterisk, get out. He's coming. Too late. Asterisk. Sarah grabbed Ethan's arm, her voice shaking. Do you hear that? Daniel was already on his feet, his face pale. The whispers were real. Before they could decide what to do, a deafening crash thundered from the floor above them. The ceiling shuddered, and then came footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy pacing back and forth. The sound stopped directly overhead. Then, a new sound began. A long, slow scratching, like claws dragging across the plaster. Ethan, ever the skeptic, insisted they investigate, to prove once and for all it was nothing supernatural. Against their better judgment, Sarah and Daniel followed him back into the corridor. The asylum felt different now, as though the walls themselves had shifted. The air was colder, their breath fogging in front of them. At the far end of the hall, a door stood open. A faded sign above it read, Asterisk, basement access, asterisk. A sickening stench of rot drifted up from the stairwell. Sarah begged them not to go down, but Ethan's stubborn pride pushed him forward. His flashlight beam cut into the darkness, and for a split second, he thought he saw something pale slip out of sight far below. Shaking it off as his imagination, he took the first step down. The others followed, and the door groaned shut behind them with a slam that echoed like a death knell. The basement was worse than anything they could have imagined. Rows of cells lined the walls, their iron bars twisted as if bent by inhuman strength. Rusted restraints dangled from the walls, some still stained dark. Their lights revealed hundreds of handprints smeared across the stone and dried blood, some small like a child's, others deformed and claw-like. The smell of copper and decay was suffocating. Sarah whispered they had to leave, but when they turned back, the stairwell door was gone. In its place was a solid wall of stone. They hadn't just descended. The asylum had swallowed them whole. The whispers grew louder, coming from every corner of the basement. Then, out of the deepest shadows, a figure emerged. He was tall and skeletal, dressed in a rotting doctor's coat. A filthy surgical mask, stained with something dark, covered the lower half of his face. In one hand, he dragged a rusted bone saw, which screeched as it scraped against the stone floor. The whispers fell silent. A voice, jagged and broken, rasped through the dark. "The experiments are not finished," Sarah screamed. The figure lurched forward. They ran. The basement twisted into an impossible maze. Corridors appeared and vanished. Rooms repeated themselves, and staircases led to nowhere. Their flashlights flickered, showing glimpses of horrors that were gone in an instant. Faces pressed against bars, hands reaching from walls, mouths opened in silent screams. Behind them, the doctor's footsteps echoed, steady and relentless, the screech of his saw a constant threat. In the chaos, Daniel stumbled into a side room. Before Ethan or Sarah could grab him, the door slammed shut. They pounded on it, shouting his name, but his screams drowned them out. They heard a wet, violent tearing sound. And then, silence. When the door creaked open again, the room was empty. Only the floor remained slick with fresh, glistening blood. Daniel was gone. Ethan pulled Sarah onward, both of them sobbing with terror, until they burst into what looked like a surgery theater. Rusted lights dangled above a stained operating table. Surgical tools were scattered across the floor, but they were wet, fresh. The doctor stood waiting in the shadows, his head tilted as though he were smiling beneath his mask. Ethan grabbed a scalpel from a tray, his hands trembling. The doctor raised his saw. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out. In the pitch black, there was the sound of steel against flesh, the tearing of screams, and then, a final, awful silence. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was lying on the floor of the asylum's main hall. Pale light seeped through the broken windows. The front doors stood wide open, the dawn just beginning to creep across the threshold. She was alone. Ethan was gone. Her hands were sticky with blood that wasn't hers, her ears still ringing with screams. Weakly, she staggered outside. The gates groaned as she pushed them open. She didn't stop running until Blackwood Asylum vanished behind the trees. When she tried to tell people what happened, no one believed her. They said she went in with 2 friends and came out alone. They said the asylum was empty, just a forgotten ruin. But Sarah knew the truth. She had seen the doctor, she had heard his voice, and in the nights that followed, whenever she closed her eyes, she heard the same rasping whisper drifting through the darkness. Asterisk, the experiments are not finished. Asterisk, thanks for listening to this tale. If you enjoyed the story and want more explorations into the dark, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.